as an owner-op, what kind of advice, this is all going to be like advice for people who are coming into trucking and then want to eventually buy a truck, buy a fleet. Like, how fast should somebody build a fleet? There's got to be like a point, like set certain number of goals, certain number of trucks, and a certain number of time.
Right.
You know, so what would you think would be the best ideal situation?
Well, the first thing is you do need to have an understanding of trucking. You need to be successful as a company driver and then successful as a lease operator, even if it's just for a year apiece or 6 months, and then you do the leasing, a short-term lease or something like that. You need to have an understanding of the business. I didn't buy a truck until, 6 years ago, out of 15 years of driving, for a lot of different reasons. I leased almost right away. I did 1 year company, and then I started leasing, and I like that aspect. What I didn't want to do, I kept thinking I wanted to buy a truck. It just was the wrong company, so luckily I didn't do that. When I came to Prime, my first fear was I couldn't believe I was going to be in a truck for 3 full years, the same truck. I figured I'd be in the shop all the time, so I had to kind of go over that hurdle as well. And then I decided to buy a truck. Now my goal to buy a truck was just simply so that in 3 years, instead of getting the lease completion bonus, I would own the truck, drive it for 3 or 4 more years with no truck payments, and that would be a good thing. But as I paid off that truck, then I started thinking of the possibilities, because now I don't have that truck payment. And I started thinking about getting another truck or two, which I did eventually about 6 months later. And my goal then was not to get buried by a whole bunch of trucks, but I wanted to grow. So I bought 6 months, I bought my first truck, and then about 3 months later I bought another truck, and then I stopped at that point, and I waited until a full year after buying the first truck. I was spacing them out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, most of the trucks didn't really make that much profit. Most of the money was still coming off of my original truck that I'm running as a team truck with my wife. And it supported the business. And I bought the next truck, and then again I waited. Now things started coming together as trucks were paying off, and it was adding up. And then this last summer, I actually bought 3 trucks during the summer. One I even paid cash for. And then it's getting more comfortable to grow. Now, I think you asked the question of when. Well, everybody's in a different financial situation. One of the things I've said for years is everybody's broke at different levels of income. So it just kind of depends on what kind of, do you have a savings? You should have money in the bank, because trucks break down. You got to ride the tide, ride that problem. If you're shut down, if you're in the shop for a month, you got to be able to survive that. And, sometimes that's it, just survive it. And then I know many people here, especially right now with the part shortages, is really kind of learning that. Even going forward, I say, what if your truck blows an engine, and it's out of warranty now? That's the biggest thing about, that's the biggest thing that they say about always applying a lease. It's because, after 600,000 miles, your warranty's over, and now the expenses are on you. Well, if you have $50,000 in the bank and or something near and the credit to have a new motor put in, that truck can go another 500,000 million miles, So you have choices at that point. If you don't have that and your truck breaks down, it's like, how much will you give me for that hunk of metal out there that has a motor in it that don't work? I'll take that money, go back to Prime, and start over, and probably going into a lease situation until you again have money saved up for the down payment. So you will, by doing what I suggest, saving that money, you can control your destiny, and now you have more choices as to what you're going to do when that time comes, and you have more choices. Other than that, you just have the one choice.
Are there any mistakes that you feel like you look back and you can say, man, I wish I knew this then? That you could, you regret, or you could fix, you can warn people about?
Well, first mistake was starting at the wrong company. Because it was not the place to be for as long as I was there. So maybe starting there was good, but I stayed there too long. Finding Prime was, 6 to 10 times better than where I was. And it actually gave me the opportunity to start considering this. Where I was before, I couldn't even let a student drive my truck without me being in it. So, taking off for a week meant I was behind when I came back. Here, even my student could upgrade and could drive my truck as a lease even on a lease program. So that was a big plus. And then, they opened up the opportunity to actually consider a small fleet. So that put me 6 years behind from the get-go. Let me see so it's really about starting sooner. Sometimes I wish I'd started truck driving, started at 45. I wish I'd started truck driving sooner because I've seen where it's taken me since then. At 45, I had no retirement plan. I'm 60 now. I think at 50, I still had no retirement plan, just struggling week to week, getting, paying all the bills. I paid off my truck. I paid off my house right before that, and I paid off, within months, paid off the first truck, and now now, as you can see, my small fleet is my retirement plan. Because I literally can have 10, 15, 20 trucks, and I don't need to drive anymore. And I'm getting that age where Social Security and then whatever income comes in with the trucks, I can continue to do this.
But Prime limits how long you can have the trucks here, don't they?
They do.
Okay.
They don't really put a year on it, but the rule is going to be about 7 years, and it's based on how much the truck is in the shop. If it's down a lot, and like I said, I know a driver I'm thinking of that has an old truck, and he just keeps putting Band-Aids on it and kicking it down the road a little bit instead of actually going in and he didn't save the money to be able to make that bigger decision. So now it doesn't mean it can't drive somewhere else after 7 years. It just kind of depends on how much, the mileage and the wear and tear on the vehicle is. We see trucks out there every day that are 10, 15 years old that are going down the road, hauling freight and could potentially be making, money and profit, So, but yeah, it's life at Prime. Now, I know another fleet owner that actually has his own authority. I'm guessing that's what he does. He then moves those trucks over to the logistics side, and they pull Prime freight. They just are doing it through his authority over there. So it's kind of that's with Prime.
But you have trucks at other carriers.
I do. I have 2 trucks outside of Prime. Not so much by choice, really. The first truck I bought, it started. I was actually helping a friend buy the truck, and he wanted to drive with RST, which is on the logistics side. They have his own authority over there, and he drove through there with them for the 2 full years. And then he wanted to go somewhere else outside of Prime's environment, and we went to another carrier. And there were some good things and bad things about there. Of course, I think the first, not bad thing, but the first thing that kind of kicks you in the gut is realizing you can't just call road assist or bring the truck into Prime and have it fixed. And then the second truck was, basically I had a driver lined up. They drove for an owner op on the logistics side and pulled Prime freight and was doing a lease purchase and didn't like that arrangement. So I got a truck for them. They went through orientation. At last day of orientation, they were told you can't drive for Prime for several reasons, most of it with recommendations from their previous owner or whatever. So she was really upset. She was in the middle of a divorce. She just moved out of the other truck. She has nowhere to go now. And I looked at her and said, I own the truck. We can drive it anywhere. So this is actually a person I've known. In fact, I trained them at the previous company. So they've been with me for like 11 years as friends. And I got her to drive for me, and now I wasn't going to leave her, in a lurch. So we hooked up with this other company that she had driven for before. We were actually pulling the Qualcomm out of the truck, and she was going to head up to this other company. When Prime called, they had caught wind of the situation upper management had of their decision, and was encouraged to look back into it and discovered that, she had driven for Prime 4 or 5 years in a row previously, and they said, with your performance then outweighs the negative points, would like for you to drive with us. Well, we were already 9/10 of the way out the door. And so we went ahead and went that route with that truck.
So we do pretty much have an endless supply of drivers with people upgrading all the time. But do you find it difficult to find drivers that you feel comfortable driving your trucks? Or
great question.
Like, or just trying to promote, like, okay, you got 2 trucks that are empty right now, let's say.
Right.
You know.
I've had that.
Okay.
Been there.
So how hard is it for you to just go find drivers? Because if you are, I would imagine you have to be in the terminal here to try to go recruit, which means now the truck that you were driving is down too.
Exactly. It's not quite that bad, but it can be, because in the contract, it says that Prime will provide us with drivers. However, it doesn't really happen. It's not like you can call your fleet manager. Your fleet manager can ask, but you're on the lease side. Most of his students on his fleet are on that fleet because they want to become lease drivers. You're looking for company drivers. So how do you get to that? Well, go to upper management. Well, upper management's solution is, well, what you really need to do is you need to get a trainer on one of your trucks, and then they train students to drive for you. Excellent. But that's months down the road. I need a driver today. And it was kind of funny. I've had this conversation within the last 6 months. There's a truck shortage, and I've got a truck empty, and you've got all these drivers waiting. It makes no sense why this couldn't be better. And it hasn't improved. I just jumped to the chase. It hasn't really improved. Like, you can just go and say, hey, whoever's over all these students waiting to upgrade, I've got a truck available. Let me talk to them all and see if anybody wants to drive for me. And 80% of our, maybe 70% or whatever, most of them want to go into lease operations. So you're looking for that 25% or whatever that it wants to be a company driver, even initially. So that's kind of hard to find.
Wouldn't it actually be a benefit to them to come and drive your truck and see how it works, and even you might be able to educate them a little bit that further down the line you can guide them.
Once you find that person, and sometimes some of our trainers out there have guided people specifically and said, hey, you need to go drive for a small fleet. Why? Well, what's your startup cost? You're going to get a truck, there's nothing in it. You know what's in their trucks? They usually have TVs in there, refrigerators, microwaves, the $400, $500 mattress in there. They're going to put tires, chains in your truck. They're taking care of everything. Truck's ready to just climb in and go. All this is their equipment. You have no startup costs whatsoever, which is, from my knowledge, most trucks do that. Most of the owners do that, because we want to encourage a driver to come and drive for us. We want to be comfortable. We've got you all hooked up. For older trucks even, there's a lot of advantages that can come with our trucks. And it depends on the owner. There's a year. If you started your lease so many years ago, you actually can have your trucks not idle. At a point where they actually can idle. But if you started after that, your trucks can't idle just like the rest of the fleet. All of my trucks can idle. So do I want them idling? No. But if it's hot or cold, idle the truck. Your APU isn't working. Idle the truck. Be comfortable. There is no, go get a heater or whatever other fixes there are. You try to put a rock on your fuel pedal or so, whatever other remedies they have out there that a lot of them usually don't work. But yeah, and like I said, it's actually just getting people to know that. So, you're taking one of the first steps of being out there to let a fleet owner say, hey, there's an advantage to this. If you don't like it, just say, hey, this isn't working for me. I want to go lease a truck now. Cool. Bring the truck in. Let's, maybe give me 2 weeks to find another driver. It's just getting the message to the driver. Most of it is done through Facebook. We put out there on the Facebook groups, but then we're hoping that there's a student out there reading the Facebook post. We cannot get into the PSD TNT student post because we're advertising, and the administrators don't like that. I get it, but that's our audience. Right there is our audience. You're in training. Are you tired of waiting, being on your trainer's truck and ready to go on your own? And the only reason why you can is because there's not a truck available. Oh, there's 5 small fleet small fleet owner trucks that are available today. It's like, why we can't get connected I wish it was better.
That's my audience, though.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's what we'll do today.
Yeah. I mean, so look, if you're looking to drive for a small fleet owner, join the other pages that are Prime and actually just put out there. Because if I don't have a truck available and I see somebody put a post out saying, hey, I'd like to drive for a small fleet owner, I'm due to upgrade, or I could have upgraded 3 weeks ago, does anybody have a truck available? We have our own Facebook group for us, and we'll let you know. We work amongst ourselves to help fill our trucks.
Earlier we were talking about expenses of like having somebody abandon a truck, or you were talking about legal holds.
Correct.
So could you kind of explain to the audience about legal holds?
Okay. Now this can happen all the time. It can happen to a lease operator, a company operator, even a small truck. But I know of a lease operator who was parked legally off on an entrance ramp. Not the best place to be, but she was legally parked because she was 10 feet from the pavement. And yet a car came up, turned down the ramp, obviously going too fast. I think they might have been under the influence of something, ran off the road and rear-ended her and possibly died. We don't know the outcome. But because of that, her truck and trailer was put on legal hold. She had to get a rental car, clean out her car, drive back to Prime, get a loaner truck for over 2 months before she could go back and get her truck when it was released. Now think of how that would affect a small fleet owner. How would that affect an owner? You bought your truck and now it's on legal hold. Yes, Prime will work with you, but these are still expenses that, we don't always think about. We think life's always going to be, wonderful. So you do have to be prepared for these circumstances. Again, truck going in the shop, blowing a motor, What am I going to do if one of my trucks blows a motor? What happens to that driver? Oh, geez, sorry, pack your stuff. I guess you can come in and get a new truck. Well, I got options. Maybe I have a truck available. Maybe you can team with me for a while, or we can team up or whatever. So you can kind of look around, but not like I'm going to have a truck sitting around just waiting. So there are hurdles for all of us. Now, I do think I could probably get a loaner truck in that situation through Prime for that driver to go into.
But in that situation, that company driver can still go back and get a company truck in the meantime, and then when your truck is ready, if it's a month or 2 months, they can come back to you.
Exactly.
Which is a really good thing to have lots of options here at Prime.
And it's true. A lot of options at Prime.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think it's better to start in a high market or a low market? Because starting in a low market, you have lower expectations, then you realize you're in a high market. And some of these people the past year came in a high market,
right?
And it's eventually going to bottom out, and they're going to start with the complaining of my fleet manager's sucking and Prime sucks and I'm getting screwed, not realizing the highs and lows of the market.
Exactly. Take this market right now. Most people on the lease side, where they see their revenue, they look at the top line. And there's hundreds of dollars that would not normally be there in a thing called fuel surcharge. Well, when that goes away, they're still looking at that top line, same load, paying less. I don't want to take it, because they're not understanding what they're looking at or why there was a difference. Yeah, your fuel surcharge was to cover your fuel costs. That's why the overall cost went up, same load. Now it's back down. Like you said, ever since 2019, was it 2019 or 2018, we were talking about, it was an incredible year. Things just went crazy in 2018, and 2019 is probably going to drop. Oh, no, it didn't. COVID happened, and we are important. It's just been very volatile. And we keep thinking, what goes up must come down at some point in time. So there is that there. And you just have to adjust. When it comes to, say, fuel economy, if you're really focused on fuel economy, when I was training, most of the time, I would tell them, I readjust. Like maybe I get a load and it don't have the time to drive 55 miles an hour and I got to do 65 all the way across the country. It doesn't mean I got to go the other way 65 miles an hour. It's a whole different load. Everything's changed. I've got more time on it. We're going to slow down and do 55 all the way. We're going to make better fuel economy. You have to readjust with each load each week, each month to the conditions of the environment, the economy, et cetera.
So how do you decide what a good load is? Because my perspective, and I'm a company driver,
Right.
okay? I'd be looking for something with high revenue, with low miles, so I break it down to know what my cost per mile was, what my revenue per mile is, make sure that I'm profitable.
Correct.
Some of these people look at it and say, well, I need to make $1,000 a day in revenue. But in my opinion, if you're making $1,000 a day in revenue, but the truck is running 1,000 miles because you're teaming, that's only $1 a mile. I wouldn't want that.
Right.
You know?
It depends on, there's a number for team and a number for solo.
Yeah. And I have people that will tell me, well, cents per mile profit doesn't matter, cost per mile doesn't matter, and that doesn't make any sense to me. So how do you do it?
Initially, I do look on it. I do the daily thing. If it's, week starts on Wednesday or week starts on Thursday now. If it's Saturday, if you're a solo truck, you probably need to be averaging about a minimum of $700 a day. That's going to bring you to, 7 days, $4,900. That's going to be a decent week. It's a target. Now, you're 3 days into it. If you're not making 700 going forward, you need to make more. If you're making more, you can afford a little bit less. Okay, maybe you only get, 4,000 in that week. It's still going to be a decent week, profit-wise. Not as good as if it was 5,000 or 5,500 for the week. Also, an old trucker that I trained years ago, he taught me a phrase that trucking's about. And he said, chickens in, feathers out. We all know you take a load to the Northeast, it pays really, really good. Coming out of the Northeast, you don't. Same thing with Florida. It's supply and demand, So you have to I look at my loads not so much, and you really have to trust your fleet manager. Your fleet manager and Prime's computer that determines our sales, they're all there to try to keep things balanced. And everybody's got their opinions about how much it's manipulated or whatever, and maybe it is. Their job is to try to make every driver at Prime profitable that wants to be profitable and wants to follow the process. Yes, I want the highest dollar load I can get on each one of my trucks or even my own truck, every load. It don't happen that way, but you do have to look at, like I said, look at that on a cost per basis, and sometimes you have to take a load that isn't that great, but it gets you to an area where you can get a good load out of there. It may fall on next week, but it's still, and I don't like to look at week by week. I try to look at that number for the week, but then sometimes you have to roll over to the next week. You and I were discussing how that's a little different on the company side, especially teaming, and the way that they pay there, which actually brings up another point. Come back to it is, how do I pay team? Because there's a whole different scenario though. A team on a company truck or team on a lease operator's truck. But I do look at that revenue per rate. But the great news about Prime and what I've got going on here with Prime is that my fleet manager does a lot of the work for me. And if you have a good relationship with your fleet manager, hopefully they'll do the same for you. I give them a lot of credit for that, because I'm just the guy holding the title, essentially, or the signature on the contract, and he's making sure that it works.